So you remember the book that I was reading, American Slave Coast History of Slave Breeding, right? We talked about a few of the states, Florida and Georgia. I'm not sure if we talked about Delaware yet. Regardless, there's another state I wanted to talk about, and that was South Carolina. I wanted to talk about South Carolina because I learned that South Carolina was literally founded by slave traders. Yeah, they were literally founded by slave traders. The four founders of the colony were members of the Royal African Company, a slave trading company. What was it, 1663? The founders encouraged settlers to buy slaves with the promise that they would be given 20 acres of land for every black male slave and 10 acres of land for every black female slave brought to the colony within the first year. Yeah, they were just giving away land if you just brought in some slaves. Mhm. And the encouragement worked because by 18, no, not 18, 1683, the black population was equal to the white population. hmm Mm. Would you like to know how they paid for the African slaves? Because African slaves was their preference. Yeah. Would you like to know how they were able to afford the African slaves? By trafficking Native American slaves. I'm not kidding. No, no. And I quote, Carolina abounded with Native Americans, and the settlers immediately began trafficking in them to supply Barbados and other English colony slave markets. They also kidnapped natives to England's enemy colonies of Saint Dominique, Martinique, and Guadeloupe. They then financed the purchase of African slaves by their sale of Native Americans because they thought African slaves were easier to control as they did not know the territory well enough to make a good escape. And since we're on the topic of South Carolina, would you like to know what else they gave us? I'll give you a hint. We protested them in 2020. I'll give you another hint. They say back the blue a lot. Did you get there? Yeah, yeah. They gave us the police force as we know it. hmm I'm talking the men in blue who use violence on black men and women and other people of color at traffic stops. Let me elaborate. The origins of modern day policing can be traced back to the slave patrols. Yes, the slave patrol was created in the early, what, 1700s? Yes, yes, it was 1704. They were first established in South Carolina in 1704, and then the idea spread throughout the colonies before their use ended following the Civil War. Now, South Carolina developed slave patrols when other means of slave control failed to quell enslaved people's resistance. Yeah, South Carolina was paranoid about slave rebellions because they just couldn't fathom why black people didn't want to be slaves. Go figure. Now, of course, slave patrols had, one goal hmm to establish a system of terror and put an end to slave uprisings, to chase down, apprehend, and return runaway slaves to their owners. And they would use excessive force to control and produce desired slave behavior. And then slave patrols morphed into militia style groups that denied access to equal rights to freed slaves at the end of the Civil War, like the White League and the Red Shirts. And they forcibly enforced the Black Codes. This was during Reconstruction. And then these militia style groups morphed into the police and the National Guard. Yeah. By the 1900s, local municipalities relied on the police force to enforce local laws, including Jim Crow laws. They relied on the police to enforce and exert excessive brutality on Black people who violated any one of the Jim Crow laws or Jim Crow etiquette laws. And we talked about those. Now, we will be having a deeper conversation about the origins of the police force, but yeah, that was a little gift from South Carolina.